Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben, and on this week's episode of Alter Your Health, we're going to be talking about goitrogens. And really, I was just talking with Suzanne about this. Goitrogens, let's first define what that means. And then really what this is all about is determining whether or not cabbage and broccoli and Brussels sprouts and a lot of these cruciferous vegetables or brassicas, which are often called goitrogens, we're going to be determining whether or not these foods actually are goitrogens. Because the truth is, yeah, we want to avoid the exposure to goitrogens. And let's talk about what the heck I'm even talking about. But before we dive into today's episode, I just wanted to remind you of any and all opportunities to receive more support and inspiration in your whole food, plant-based living and healthy lifestyle journey. We're here for you at Alter Health. And if you're looking for more support, check out our Meal Guide membership, a great way to experience some healing benefits through integrating some more healing and nourishing recipes crafted by none other than Dr. Susanna Alter. So let's talk about goitrogens. And as is the case, as we've been doing in this little series, I've got some graphics to share, some studies to share, some research to dive into. And this is just another one of our debunking the nonsense videos, because we have been, a lot of people have questions about foods like lectins or oxalates or phytates, which we covered in the prior 3 episodes. Actually, we took a break to talk about the metabolic health and the Eat More, Way Less program that we're super excited to be in the midst of now. By the way, if you're interested in joining that program, you can always do so, and you'll just kind of catch up. And this program will soon be kind of a self-paced sort of thing. So reach out and jump on in. It's never too late. So anyways, now we're back into the flow of the debunking the nonsense. We talked about the phytates. We talked about the lectins. We talked about the oxalates. And hopefully you're like, okay, I can eat these foods. I don't have to worry about it. And some people brought up, like, what about the goitrogens? What about the goitrogens? And by goitrogens, people are generally, well, I'll just share with you what the Instagram social media people are talking about goitrogens for those looking at the YouTube video or the Facebook video. And for those just listening, I'll explain the graphics that we're looking at. Here's one just saying thyroid function and goitrogenic foods. And then, of course, the caption goes on to say, I don't have the caption, but it's, you want to avoid these foods. And look at this: cabbage, broccoli, peaches, tomatoes, cauliflower. I think this is spinach, or maybe it's bok choy. Bok choy is one of the, so-called goitrogenic foods, and apples, just kind of random stuff. Here's our classic anti-nutrient post that we've seen before, a different version of it. Lectins, phytates, oxalates, tannins. Maybe we'll talk about tannins a bit. Tannins, funny enough, it's really coffee and tea and that sort of thing that are the most tannin-rich foods. And then goitrogens. So goitrogens here, they have goitrogens prevent iodine from entering the thyroid gland. That's in fact true. That's what a goitrogen is. And but the question is whether or not these foods like broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and brassica vegetables are in fact goitrogenic. Here is a list of high goitrogens. Ooh, that makes it sound even more scary. High goitrogens and mild goitrogens. And it's a long list. It's like, oh my gosh, if we're going to be avoiding all of these foods and still trying to eat like a nutrient rich, whole food, plant-based diet, good luck. If you're avoiding lectins, oxalates, goitrogens, and phytates, there's nothing to eat. There's nothing to eat. So good luck. So I came across some other fun photos. Here's a little kid with a huge cabbage. Talk about goitrogens. That is quite a goitrogen if I've ever seen one that size of that cabbage. Oh my gosh. And by the way, as you will soon find out through exploring and diving into the science behind these so-called goitrogens, I have come to the conclusion that cabbage is one of the most underrated vegetables that exists on our beautiful planet. It's such an amazing healing food. And by no means should you be eating this entire cabbage. Like, what is it? Probably like 20 pounds in one serving or anything like that. But cabbage is just cheap and easy to store and accessible. And you can cook it, eat it raw in like a coleslaw kind of slaw sort of salad, or saute it. And here's my other favorite quote unquote goitrogenic food, and it is Romanesco cauliflower. And this is just so beautiful. If you've ever seen the Romanesco, for those just listening, it's kind of like the fractally version of the cauliflower. Talk about just incredible creations from nature. And this same fractal is present in us all. It's like this is the kind of building block, organized spiral fractal thing that is kind of organizing all of life. So that's one of my favorite so-called goitrogens. And another one of my favorite so-called goitrogens is this. We're looking at a big bundle of broccoli sprouts. We already talked about sulforaphane, which is, now it's time to maybe back up and unpack this topic a little bit more. So these broccoli sprouts, are they goitrogens or are they not goitrogens? So what are we talking about? Goitrogens are any sort of compound that interferes, as this Instagram post said, interferes with proper uptake of iodine by the thyroid gland. Iodine is, of course, required for the thyroid gland to create active thyroid hormone and proper thyroid function. So essentially, goitrogen is associated with iodine deficiency in the body and therefore low thyroid function. And it's called, and these compounds that are goitrogenic are called goitrogens because if we don't have enough iodine, then our thyroid actually tries to compensate for that by working harder. And what ends up happening is we have proliferation of thyroid cells, and then we have a goiter, which is, of course, the nodule. I guess that's kind of, a thyroid nodule is technically different than a goiter, but a goiter is a type of nodule, I guess you could say, is kind of the overgrowth of the thyroid gland. This has been classically the main goitrogen is iodine deficiency. Iodine deficiency will cause a goiter, and that's why table salt is commonly iodinized. Iodinized table salt, right? They've added iodine to table salt because, whoever they are, thought, well, everyone's sprinkling salt on all their food, so let's just put some iodine in the salt to prevent the expression of a goiter and to support people's thyroid function. Hey, that was actually probably a pretty good public health policy. Now, there's a lot of other really more healthy ways to consume iodine than sprinkling salt on your food, as we'll talk about. I guess we can just jump right into it. The food's highest in iodine on a whole food plant-based diet and on any sort of diet, far and away, it's anything coming from the ocean. And by that, I mean sea vegetables, a sheet of nori or a tablespoon of dulse. Some of our favorite sea vegetables are going to far exceed your daily iodine intake or requirement. So we recommend that people include these sort of sea vegetables in their whole food plant-based diet. And you don't have to even do it every day, maybe a few times a week, and you can kind of keep that iodine level sufficient. As we'll talk about, that's one of the most important things for thyroid health. And really, I guess I'll just come out right and say it. The reason why these quote unquote goitrogenic foods like the cabbage and the cauliflower and the broccoli and all of these kind of things, the reason why these foods can potentially cause issues is really due to iodine deficiency. So these foods kind of exacerbate or feed on an iodine deficiency. And if we're sufficient with iodine, we have nothing to fear. So that is what a goitrogen is. And I just find it kind of ironic, I guess, that a lot of people who are fear mongering around these goitrogenic foods, the cabbage, the broccoli, Brussels sprouts, these brassicas and cruciferous vegetables, that, let's face it, we kind of, in our daily food goals that we give to our clients, we recommend that people be eating these cruciferous vegetables every day. A lot of the same people who fearmonger about the cruciferous vegetables also acknowledge the benefits of the cruciferous vegetables. And by that, I'm talking about the compounds like sulforaphane and the indole 3-carbinol. And I'm sorry, there's going to be a little bit of jargon in today's episode. But essentially what these are different phytonutrients that are found in the cruciferous vegetables that are good. And the same cruciferous vegetables apparently have these phytonutrients that are so-called quote unquote bad. So yeah, Anisha just ate a bundle of broccoli sprouts. Cheers to that. We've got some growing on our counter right now. So yeah, these a lot of these health promoting high nutrient density foods that people are like, oh yeah, eat more of, but be careful because they're also goitrogens. So it's just kind of ironic and counterintuitive and leads to all this confusion that you and I might be faced with. So unpacking some terminology, a lot of the main goitrogen compound in foods that people are talking about is called goitrin. Oh, what a name. Poor little guy. Just this and this poor little compound gets this bad little nickname, goitrin. And goitrin is essentially what is termed a glucosinolate. Glucosinolates are phytonutrients found in abundance in a lot of our cruciferous vegetables. And there are all sorts of glucosinolates. Glucofuranin, I always mispronounce this one. Glucoraphanin is a health promoting great glucosinolate that is broken down to create sulforaphane. So glucosinolates are broken down to create compounds like thiocyanates, isothiocyanates, and other compounds. And goitrin is a thiocyanate, and sulforaphane is an isothiocyanate. So really what happens is after we chew our green leafy vegetables, our broccoli, our cauliflower, the myrosinase enzyme, and I'm sorry for getting into some science, but this might be helpful for people to just kind of rest easy around the whole topic. This myrosinase enzyme breaks down glucosinolates to create these isothiocyanates, thiocyanates, and also nitriles that have all sorts of health promoting and maybe goitrogenic effects in the body. So we're going to now turn into some science to kind of unpack what the science has to say around whether or not these brassicas, these cruciferous vegetables are in fact goitrogenic or not. So I've got some articles that I'm sharing on the screen here, and you see here here's the title of the article is Concentrations of Thiocyanate and goitrin in human plasma, their precursor concentration in brassica vegetables and associated potential risk for hypothyroidism. So this is going right to what the question at hand is. And I'm just going to read the entire conclusion. I've got it highlighted here for us all. Components of brassica vegetables demonstrate important anti-carcinogenic properties. They're talking about the sulforaphane and so many of the other kind of health promoting, glycosinolates and nitriles and thiocyanates and whatnot. So these anti-carcinogenic properties that must be balanced against the potential adverse effects of progoitrin and thiocyanate on thyroid hormone production. So yeah, this article is recognizing maybe the balance of the anti-carcinogenic health promoting benefits of these sort of brassica vegetables and the potential goitrogenic effects of these brassica vegetables. The consumption of typical serving sizes of raw commercial, essentially broccoli, Chinese cabbage, bok choy, broccoli rab, corresponds to progoitrin and thiocyanate generating indole glucosinolate exposure at concentration far lower than those likely to impair thyroid function. So essentially, don't worry about it. don't worry about it. It's far lower than any sort of level that would impair thyroid function. In contrast, excessive consumption of raw Russian, so they're singling in a couple different species, Russian Siberian kale, some collards and Brussels sprouts, all of which have high progoitrin concentrations and thus can decrease iodine uptake into thyroid and affect synthesis of thyroid hormone, should be avoided. So essentially, they're talking about and they have excessive consumption as defined as greater than 1 kilogram per day for several months. So 1 kilogram is, of course, 2.2 pounds. So they're recommending that you don't eat more than 2.2 pounds of kale every day for several months. I've personally never met anyone eating 2.2 kilogram or 2.2 pounds of kale per day for many months on end. So that's kind of the recommendation here. I guess before we move into the next study, I forgot to also say that really these goitrogenic compounds, oh, I'm sorry, that's not the right term. These thiocyanates and these isothiocyanates like goitrin and sulforaphane, the health promoting ones, and the potential adversely affecting ones, all these compounds are severely diminished in their potency, and they're essentially just broken down when we cook our vegetables. So steaming broccoli, sauteing kale, essentially, and so this study was looking at raw vegetables. So if we're sauteing kale, then that goes down even, I believe, by like 50-fold. So it'd be something like 100 pounds of kale per day, every single day for months on end. We shouldn't be eating that much kale. That's kind of what that study is concluding. So it's essentially telling us, don't worry about these goitrins. Don't worry about these thiocyanate compounds in our vegetables. But it's saying if you are wanting to worry, if you choose to worry, then only worry about the Russian or Siberian kale species and maybe the Brussels sprouts raw. And I've never had raw Brussels sprouts. That would be really difficult to eat. So anyways, that's that one. And here's another one, the title of this study looking at the concentrations of thiocyanate and goitrin in human plasma and their precursor concentrate. This is the same study. This is the same study. And this is the abstract of that study. So I think it's that the abstract reiterates the conclusion. Following enzymatic breakdown, some glucosinolates in brassica vegetables produce sulforaphane and other isothiocyanate that possess anti-carcinogenic activity. In contrast, progoitin and indole cyclic glucosinolates degrade to goitrin and thiocyanate respectively and may decrease thyroid hormone production. So they're kind of sharing with us the science that we know. There's like all these glucosinolate compounds. Some of them are really health promoting, anti-cancer, super powerful, but the same kind of compounds can go in the other direction and create these goitrin compounds that have been studied for their quote unquote goitrogenic properties. Thiocyanate, and then the end of the conclusion, or the end of the abstract here, says thiocyanate generated from consumption of indole glucosinolate can be assumed to have minimal adverse risk for thyroid health. Minimal, again, we unpacked the details. Maybe the red Russian kale, don't eat more than 100 pounds a day, something like that. Iodine status and thyroid function of Boston area vegetarians and vegans. Before I talk about this study, I want to highlight one point that I just kind of glossed over really quickly. So really what these quote unquote goitrogenic compounds are doing are interfering with our thyroid's ability to uptake iodine. Essentially, if you just consider, if our iodine level is at this level and our goitrogen intake is at this level, then that's going to maybe not be the best scenario. If we've got low iodine intake and high intake of these quote unquote goitrogenic compounds, but if we have the same intake of the goitrogenic compounds, we're eating 2 pounds of red Russian kale a day or whatever it is, but then we are also eating sea vegetables and we're eating plenty of iodine rich foods. By the way, like kale and cruciferous vegetables are also iodine rich, but the sea vegetables much more so. So if we're getting sufficient iodine intake, then we don't have anything to worry about really ever. And I believe I've got some studies that are backing up this statement but it's really kind of common sense, because if these goitrogenic compounds are interfering with iodine uptake, then we just have to kind of increase our iodine uptake to keep things in balance, And before I turn into that study, I just want to point out that one of the most potent goitrogenic compounds, which actually doesn't really get talked about a lot, if at all, is exposure to other halogen compounds. Because iodine, if you remember your chemistry table, your periodic table of elements, iodine is a halogen. So the other halogen atoms like fluoride exposure and chlorine exposure. And really, of course, when we think about chlorine and fluoride, we think about drinking water. A lot of drinking water contains both fluorine or fluoride and chlorine. So exposure to those, and also bromine. Of course, bromine is in a lot of processed foods. So exposure to those things are going to replace or displace iodine from our body. And those are really the goitrogens that directly interfere with our body's utilization of iodine. So definitely want to be mindful of consuming chlorine, fluoride, and bromine. And again, best thing we can do there is filter our water with a really high quality filtration system, because quite frankly, all tap water across the board, as far as I know, has chlorine and fluoride. Pretty much, with very few exceptions. If you're plugged into any sort of city water system, you're probably drinking chlorine and fluoride. You're probably exposing yourself to goitrogens, and you might be suffering hypothyroidism as a result. And then, oh, excuse me, I just bumped the table. And then on top of that, yeah, if you're eating a lot of these, like if you're eating 3 pounds of kale a day, man, maybe you're not in the best place. But if you're drinking purified water, if you're getting rid of that chlorine and fluoride intake, if you're eating sea vegetables, then you can eat 100 pounds of kale a day and not worry about a thing. So let's look at this study. I found it pretty interesting. This is really actually maybe a little bit concerning for some vegans who aren't eating sea vegetables. So this is really just kind of a plug to get your sea vegetables in. Again, it doesn't have to be every single day, but this study is looking at the iodine status and thyroid function of Boston area vegetarians and vegans. It's not looking good, guys. It's not looking good for you Boston area vegetarians and vegans. You got to up your intake. Whoops, where'd it go? We got to up our intake of our sea vegetables. So U.S. vegetarians are iodine sufficient. So vegetarians iodine sufficient. I don't know where they're getting their iodine from, because vegetarians, of course, eat. Assuming they're lacto-ovo, so eating dairy and eggs. I guess eggs maybe have a little bit of iodine in them. So US vegans, on the other hand, may be at risk for low iodine intake, and vegan women of childbearing age should supplement with 150 micrograms iodine daily. Environmental perchlorate and thiocyanate exposure are not associated with thyroid dysfunction in these groups. So this study is saying, despite the low iodine status of these vegans, exposure to thiocyanates like the goitrin in cabbage and brassica or cruciferous vegetables is not associated with thyroid dysfunction. So yeah, it's saying that, even though these women are insufficient in their iodine intake, the exposure to these quote unquote goitrogenic foods is still not an issue. So this is really suggesting that don't worry about eating cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower. Just worry about getting your iodine intake to a sufficient level. And this, of course, is recommending that people supplement with 150 micrograms of iodine daily. And what you can do instead of that is just sprinkle some dulse flakes on your salad. It's pretty delicious, and you should give it a try. And that will far exceed your 150 micrograms. Take it to the next level. So yeah, that's a kind of a good reminder to just stay on top of iodine intake. All right, what is our next study here? A pooled analysis of case control studies of thyroid cancer cruciferous and other vegetables. So yeah, this is looking at the association between thyroid cancer and the consumption of cruciferous vegetables, because there have been some questioning as to whether or not these pro-goitrogenic foods, like our brassicas, if we are kind of stressing the thyroid in this way, is there an association with other thyroid conditions beyond just hypothyroidism or low thyroid function? Can we actually have some increased cancer risk? And this conclusion is that the combined analysis indicates that cruciferous vegetables are not positively related to thyroid cancer risk. Pretty conclusive. Increased cruciferous vegetables not associated with thyroid cancer risk. Their effect does not seem to be substantially different from that of other vegetables, which appear to be protective of thyroid cancer. So this study is saying not only are our cruciferous vegetables not a risk factor for thyroid cancer, but they actually are protective against thyroid cancer and so many other cancer. Because if you remember, broccoli sprouts and all of our cruciferous vegetables have other glucosinolates like glucoraphanin that are broken down to anti-cancer compounds, such as sulforaphane being the most famous one, amongst others. So this is just going to show you essentially that the benefits from consuming these brassicas and cruciferous vegetables that we love far outweigh the potential risk of consuming these brassicas and cruciferous vegetables. Here's another compound. So genistein, and we're going to be talking more about genistein next week when we talk about phytoestrogens. I believe maybe we have to talk about nightshades too, because someone asked about nightshades. And to be quite honest, there's not a lot of science there. So we'll see. I'll do some digging and see if it's worth an episode. But the fact is that there's just not a lot to say about nightshades. There's just a lot of bro science, if you will. So genistein is a compound in soybeans. And soybeans, let's see if they're on any of our lists here. I believe they're probably on this one, right? Our high goitrogens and our mild goitrogens. What the heck? I don't see any soy. What am I? You got to be kidding me. Usually, edamame. Edamame are soybeans. Okay. Edamame are high goitrogens. Thank you for letting us know that edamame are high goitrogens. So edamame are, of course, a source of genistein, which is a compound that we'll talk more about when we talk about phytoestrogens. But genistein is another quote unquote potential goitrogenic compound in food. So genistein aglycone. Why do I do not know how to say that? Genistein aglycone does not affect thyroid function. Results from a 3-year randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial. So this one's just kind of thrown out like, okay, like people are concerned about consuming genistein and thyroid function because of the potential goitrogenic effects. Title of the study, don't worry about it. These data suggest that genistein intake does not significantly increase the risk of clinical or subclinical hypothyroidism at the dose of 54 milligrams per day. So to be quite honest, I don't really know how much 54 milligrams per day of genistein is. I didn't dig in and find out like what that equates to in terms of the number of edamame that we're consuming or whatever. But essentially, don't worry about genistein either. Genistein is another compound that has potential goitrogenic fear mongering around it. Don't worry about it. That's the moral of the story there. And oh yeah, all these fear mongers about our goitrogenic compounds. You've heard about resveratrol, right? Resveratrol is a compound that has made red wine famous. Red wine is the health promoting anti-cancer longevity beverage that it is because of resveratrol, which is of course found in grapes or raisins and any form. And resveratrol is in a lot of whole plant foods, but resveratrol is of course a phytonutrient that a lot of people take as a supplement. A lot of people think, okay, this is this antioxidative, longevity promoting nutrient. It's gotten a lot of good reputation behind it. And this study is showing us that resveratrol has anti-thyroid effects both in vitro and in vivo, meaning that in cell studies and animal studies as well as in human studies, or in vivo is technically just in animal studies or human studies. These data suggest that resveratrol acts as a thyroid disruptor and a goitrogen, which indicates the need for caution as a supplement and for therapeutic uses. Have you heard that from your functional medicine doctor? Resveratrol acting as a goitrogen? Most people are just throwing out resveratrol like it's freaking Skittles and just popping those things thinking that it's like, oh, it's just antioxidants, it's just anti-cancer, it's just this longevity super duper pill. And the point in me sharing this is not to fearmonger about resveratrol. The point in me sharing this is that we should be consuming all of these phytonutrients, all of these compounds. We should be considering them and also consuming them in the context of a real whole food plant-based diet. So of course, if we're packaging goitrin in a supplement and taking that, then yeah, we'll probably find studies like this saying that goitrin is associated with anti-thyroid effects. If we're kind of taking this individual compound out of the complex matrix of carbohydrates and proteins and amino acids and fatty acids and fiber and vitamins and minerals and all the complex interconnected systems of phytonutrients, if we're plucking one thing out of the system and studying it in this reductionistic manner, we're probably going to find things that we don't want to find out. But when we're consuming these foods in the context of whole plant foods, in the context ideally of our whole food plant-based diet, then everything just synergizes and works together. So that's the reason why I wanted to share this study. Again, not to say, and maybe to caution against ingesting these isolated compounds. Yes, I do believe that eating grapes and raisins is much better than taking a resveratrol capsule, and also much more cost effective. There's more benefits that are also in those grapes and raisins than resveratrol. There's all sorts of other nutrients and fuel and good things that benefit the body. So that really helps drive home this point that I think it's really important when we're talking about all of these quote unquote potential anti-nutrient compounds. When we're talking about any vitamin or health promoting nutrient as well, a lot of things are overly praised, even sulforaphane, that we talked about before. Because for sure, if we isolate sulforaphane, it looks really good. And maybe, if we're just eating a handful of broccoli sprouts, yeah, continue that, keep doing that. But the fact is that all of our nutrition, all of the vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients and fiber and everything else works together. And that's like how humans obviously have been designed to interact and relate with food. We haven't been created to just like pick and choose our nutrients and piece it together and think that we can somehow outsmart nature by just choosing that carbohydrate and that fatty acid and those amino acids and a little bit of that vitamin, a little bit of this phytonutrient, and just think that we can somehow piece together our health in that way. We can't do that, and nor do we need to. And it's kind of silly and and inefficient to try to do that. The point is just eat real whole food and don't worry about all of these potential compounds that, oh my gosh, in isolation might be really scary. But when we're looking in the context of real whole foods, not an issue. The people that I know anecdotally that eat more vegetables, that eat more whole foods are healthier. And I'm sure you probably have had the same experience. The people in your life who eat more whole foods, who eat more of these quote unquote anti-nutrient fear-mongering foods, these kind of things, these lectins, these phytates, these oxalates, these tannins, these goitrogens. Oh my gosh, people who eat these real foods, are they sicker? No, they're healthier. Because in the context of a whole food plant-based lifestyle, these things are non-issues. And again, if you want to go back and learn about the lectins and the oxalates and the phytates, that would be in episode one 365, 366, 367, I believe. Goitrogens today. Next week, we'll be talking about phytoestrogens, which, just spoiler alert, the better term for phytoestrogens are estrogen receptor modulators. They are not pro-estrogen and they're not anti-estrogen. They're estrogen receptor modulators, meaning that they just influence the expression of estrogen receptors in a case-specific, contextual sort of way, which is quite cool. We'll be talking more about the science behind that. And until next time, thanks as always for tuning in. And if you have anyone in your life that is still in fear about eating vegetables, you can share this episode with them and encourage them to eat more of their cruciferous vegetables, their brassica vegetables. And also, I just want to make a plug again for our iodine-rich sea vegetables as well. As we stay sufficient with our iodine intake, we need not worry about any of these quote unquote pro-goitrogen compounds. So thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you guys next time. Peace and love. Till then.